Alrighty, a little bit of a technical difficulty there. Can you guys hear me? I think I got the audio going back here. Okay, yes. Let me see if I can fix that. I'm new somewhat to StreamYard, so please be forgiving with me as I try to cover this. All right, I'm going to try to share the screen one more time, and if not, I will just go ahead and read from the slides. But I'll give it one more go. All right, I should be sharing. Let me know if you guys can hear me. Can everybody hear me all right? All right, I should be sharing. Yes, Kevin, if you want to advertise it. I think Jay just went live doing a show of his own, so his server might be enjoying that. But if you'd like, yes, okay, so Eusebius is letting me know that we can, or you guys can hear me. All right, so the history of Our Lady of Walsingham. Some feedback. I'm not sure why. Is it too interruptive? But I'll keep trucking along. It's typically dated at 1061 AD. However, some scholars contest that, and they try to pin it earlier, around 1053 AD. However, the historical consensus right now is the 1061 date. So this centers around, it's entitled Our Lady of Walsingham. So this comes from Walsingham, which is in Norfolk, England. It centers around Lady Rocheldis de Faversham, and Lady Rocheldis was a minor noblewoman living in England, and she had a vision, and I will shorten it down to make it manageable, because this video isn't just on Our Lady of Walsingham, but she has a couple visions, and the Blessed Virgin Mary takes her to the Holy House, which is the house where Jesus and Mary and Joseph lived in Nazareth. So she got to see this house and the dimensions of it, and was tasked by the Blessed Virgin Mary to reconstruct the house. Suffice it to say, she doubted the nature of the apparition, and the Blessed Virgin Mary eventually sent her a physical vision of her seeing the angels building the Holy House. And when she went inside, she found a pristine Anglo-Saxon statue of the Virgin Mary, which is now known as Our Lady of Walsingham. It was one of the largest pilgrimage places in Western Europe. In the 1100s, an Augustinian prior forms. Numerous English monarchs visit, both kings and queens. And it was particularly famous for what's called the Walsingham Way. The Walsingham Way was about a half a mile to a mile walk, typically done barefoot, from the Holy House, which had become a chapel, to the main church that was constructed in the 1100s. And this was done barefoot. So the Holy House was known as the Slipper Chapel, because that's where you would leave your slippers. In 1538, King Henry VIII pillaged Walsingham of its jewels and gold and silver and other valuables, and the image was dragged through mud in the streets, and eventually it was burned. That, on a dark note, we'll leave it there, but on a brighter note, feast days. The statue was reconstructed in 1922 by an Anglican priest. It was based upon the surviving priory seal, the letterhead of the priory, so we know what the statue looks like. The statue was solemnly translated to the Slipper Chapel on October 15th, 1931, marking one of the first Marian processions in England post-Reformation. On September 24th, the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches hold a feast day, and October 15th, the date of the translation, both the Antiochian Archdiocese and the Anglican Communion commemorate Our Lady of Walsingham. Rocor commemorates Our Lady of Walsingham on October 8th, the new style, or September 24th on the old calendar. So here are some pictures of it. This is the Slipper Chapel exterior. And this is the interior, replete with the Roman Catholic statue. This is not the one that was moved here in the 30s. That one got moved to a different chapel. So this is the Roman Catholic shrine that is pictured. This next picture is the shrine exterior chapel of the Anglican Walsingham shrine, I guess you could say. And this is the interior of the Anglican shrine. It just went through a remodel and was finished, if not this year, it was the very end of last year. And this is the Orthodox shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham. It's located within the complex of the Anglican shrine, and the formal title of the temple is Mother of God of the Life-Giving Spring. It's not a full-time chapel, meaning the liturgy is not served here on a weekly basis, but it is open to any canonical Orthodox priest, and it's administered through the Moscow Patriarchate. This is the St. Seraphim Chapel. It is the Russian Orthodox Church in Walsingham, and here's continuous services are held, and it is run by the Moscow Patriarchate. This is the shrine at St. Augustine's Orthodox Church in Denver, Colorado, a part of the Antiochian Archdiocese, Western Rite. And this is my personal Walsingham statue. All right, looks like we have a question. From Jeremy Klein. He says, when did the veneration of Our Lady of Walsingham start in Orthodoxy? So with that, I would point to if it depends on which date you take the apparition to be from. Some historians say 1053, some say 1061. Either way, it was pre-Norman conquest, so the people there were indeed Orthodox. So I would say as soon as the apparition started, pilgrims started to visit the chapel. It was restored to Orthodox worship in the 1900s when the Orthodox chapels were built. And he has a two-part to that question. He says, and also, is it exclusive to the Western Rite or do Eastern Rite Orthodox people in Antioch and Rocor also celebrate this apparition? That's a very good question. It's actually, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any impediment of the Eastern Rite folks of either jurisdiction to celebrate this feast day. It's interesting because both Antioch and Rocor maintain vicariates, and each of the vicariates has their own calendar, which is modeled off of the traditional Western calendar. So my answer to that would be it's not exclusive, but I'm not sure how widespread the devotion is outside of the vicariates. So I hope that answers your question. And lastly, since originally this was going to be a presentation on statuary, I discovered this image on Instagram going around, and I figured I would share it in this presentation. which is a reliquary of the Omophorion of Saint Tikhon of Moscow, and it's located in the university named after him in Moscow. And it's a statuary / bust of the saint. So I find that interesting. That it got me thinking, well, a lot of reliquaries have statuary on them. So I wanted to kind of dovetail on that and talk about statuary. A lot of times we have a narrow mind about statuary, and we think that it has to be some grandiose 15-foot tall alcove in a church, although that's not necessarily the case. Statuary can exist much like iconography on a smaller scale. So things like reliquaries that contain the hands of saints or busts of saints, like the one portrayed on the screen, that's adequately statuary as well. It's just a different style. So on principle, statuary is okay. There are just some stylistical differences between how the Orthodox view it and the Roman Catholic Church views it. So with that, I will wait just a few more minutes for my belated guest to arrive. If he can't make it tonight, we might have to reschedule his portion of tonight's stream. But before I close out, does anybody have any other questions about the material that I've shown tonight, or any questions in general that I could answer? And while I wait for any questions to arrive, I will also wait for my belated co-host. Jeremy Klein says, "Thanks, King. No problem." UR says, "Hi, howdy." I'll just give it one more moment. Again, I do apologize. This was supposed to be a bit of a longer stream tonight, but my co-host ran into something and he said he was going to be a little late. I'm not sure if that means he's not going to make it tonight, but if that's the case, I will just retitle this stream a presentation on Our Lady of Walsingham, and then we will go ahead and try to shoot for next Friday to do his side of the presentation. All right, we have a question. Allheart says, "I don't know if you've addressed this, but what do you make of the canon and the rudder of St. Nicodemus against statuary?" I haven't personally read his interpretation of statuary in the rudder. I just know the tradition long before the rudder was ever compiled, and there are Orthodox statues, and there are miracle working statues even in Greece and the Middle East and in Russia. So I just know what the wider tradition is. I'm not familiar with St. Nicodemus's personal interpretation of the canon, of a specific canon would be. I just know the general practice, historically speaking. UR says, "Are you Western Rite Ortho, bro?" I am indeed Western Rite Orthodox. As for Ortho, bro, sure, yeah. I guess you could say that. But yeah, Allheart, back to your question. If you have the relevant citation, I'd love to take a look at it. Just to my knowledge, at face value, I'm pretty sure the rudder is just a compilation of the canons along with specific interpretations of them by the great canonists of the church. Nicodemus being one of them. I could be wrong on that. I'm open to correction if anybody would like to correct me with their sources, but that's what it seems to me. So I don't know if his specific interpretation is the end-all be-all. All right, we have another question here. thoughts on the Eucharistic processions in Antiochian Western Rite. So the scope of this channel is sort of a pan-Western Rite Orthodox, if I'm going to discuss Western Rite Orthodoxy. Although Statuary is not specific to the Western Rite, it is common, more so common in the Western Rite parishes than in the Eastern Rite parishes. But my co-host, who is belated tonight, has several examples from history as well as up to as recent as last year of statuary in Orthodox churches, quite prominent Orthodox churches. So I think that would be wise to wait for his side on that. But anyway, pan-Orthodox is what I'm after here. Now, Rocor and Antioch have slight differences in their approach to Eucharistic processions in Orthodoxy. Rocor, to my knowledge, the only time that it's processed would be either during the use of Sarum, during Palm Sunday, and during Holy Thursday, moving it to the altar of repose. Antioch does them for the Feast of Corpus Christi, which is not a feast on the Rocor Western Rite calendar. So I suppose generally it's okay. I just know that Rocor specifically has a little bit more restrictions on it. But even in the Eastern Rite, the gifts are processed through the church for the liturgy of the pre-sanctified. So it kind of depends on what you mean by a Eucharistic procession, if that makes sense. So I hate to give you kind of a schwaffly answer there, but yeah, I hate to give you a bad answer there. However, I just don't want to get into jurisdictional politics. I will just say that there are different approaches maintained by each of the jurisdictions. All Heart says, let me see if I can find the exact canon. That would be nice. If I'm not mistaken, do you mean the canon as in... Because I'm not aware of a canon existing against statuary, at least on an ecumenical council level. To my knowledge, I thought you were referring to St. Nicodemus's interpretation of a canon. So I just want to make sure that I'm giving accurate commentary on what you're asking. But I have not heard anything from the guest recently. So it looks like his presentation might have to be put off for a little while. Maybe it will be next Friday's show. We'll have to see. But yeah, I don't mind answering just a few questions to take up the time for Friday's show. I'll give a few more minutes to All Heart to take a look at the rudder there for us, and maybe some other time we can go into it if he can't, or he or she cannot find the specific canon or commentary on said canon. But yeah, while we're waiting, if you're not already, please like and subscribe. And I'm going to try to have a new show out, hopefully every Friday live, as we work on our large-scale project, which has to do with a patristic commentary on the Western Rite Mass. That's our current big project in the works. Scottish Slav has a question. He says, the issue is laymen are reading canons as though they can interpret them as bishops with removing the historical context is just typical Americanism. Well, I agree, but I would phrase it a little bit more politely. I would say that it's not necessarily up to laymen to interpret canons. Canons are typically interpreted by the bishop in a specific context within time and space. So canons exist for realistic reasons. They're not arbitrary theological concepts. So I think you're onto something there, Scottish Slav. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's an Americanist thing. I think that pitfall is open to anybody. But yeah, it looks like we're getting a few more people joining us tonight on the stream. So right now we're kind of doing a questions thing while we're waiting on any other guests. So yeah, any other questions, anything like that, it's an open book. Oh, Ossifrage is here. Let's go ahead and add him to the stream. Hello, Ossifrage. Can you hear me?
Yes. Is there any echo?
Ossifrage, if you just want to talk for just 1 second, I'm actually going to go grab my headphones. I'm a bit.
Can you hear me though?
This evening, so just kind of fill up the space and give me just a minute.
Am I audible? Let me see. Let me go to... Kevin can hear me? I need a yes. Am I audible? Okay. So, any questions while I...
All right, I am back up and running. Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure nothing changed in terms of my audio output now that I have put on some headphones. All right, Nor says I am audible. Everyone can hear me. Good deal. Ossifrage,
You can hear me though, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can everybody hear Ossifrage?
Yeah, I'm audible.
All right, perfect. Oh, I have an amazing question. I'll go ahead and hit while Ossifrage pulls up his presentation. John, why do I like the Western Rite so much?
This is a reoccurring this is a reoccurring question that
it is
comes up, but this is personally directed towards me because I know this person very well.
Who is it?
My fiance.
Oh, well, I like the Western Rite very much because it speaks to my cultural patrimony. I used to be a former Lutheran and a former Anglican, so it speaks to me. It also is important for the mission of the West. It's useful in converting souls, so there's the missiological side of it. So I care about it for that reason as well. I also care about it because it was a large portion of my patron saint, St. John Maximovich, his life work in France. So I see it as also continuing in the steps of not just St. John, but several other saints. All Heart says, YouTube doesn't like links in live chat, but for reference, for yourself. The Orthodox Arch Journal has an article by Aidan Hart on Statuary. Yeah, it doesn't like them in live chat. You might be able to post it as a comment down below, although sometimes I hear YouTube removes those as well.
That the article I've read it. It's actually referenced in the presentation.
Oh, there we go. UR says, is the Mass of St. Gregory used at Western Rite churches today the same as the pre-schism Mass or not? Textually, yes. Ceremonially, practices tend to vary, but largely, yes. All right. Ossifrage, I think that covers the questions. Are you ready for your presentation?
Yeah, if everyone else is ready.
Yeah, we are ready.
All right. Let's see. Is my stream visible?
It doesn't look like it is. Let me try to share it on my side. Oh boy.
Okay, now let's try.
All right, try to present it. All right, I think everybody can see it.
Is that a yay or a nay from the audience?
Yes, we can see it.
All right.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, and you just go ahead and take it away.
Well, you can. I want you to ask questions and stuff.
Well, yeah, I'll chime in as I see fit.
So we're going to do a presentation on statuary in the Orthodox Catholic Church, mainly focusing on history, patristic history, whether or not the practice is valid canonically or in any other sense. And that's about it. Our goals to give a fair and reasonable defense for use of statuary within the Western Rite and statuary in general, but mainly for our purpose is statuary within the context of within the temple, and to give historical context as to how statuary was used within the first 1,000 years. We would like to familiarize the audience with how the church viewed statuary in a liturgical setting, whether or not they are or are not images, whether they're icons, whether they are decorative. We would like, and at the ends, I'd like to give a proper theological interpretation and explication of how they should be viewed, used, and so on and so forth. I'd like to also mention that we are not here to influence their use within the Byzantine Rite. We are not here to defend statuary as used by other churches as well. Like, we're not here to defend Roman Catholic statuary where they present Christ as mortified with 1,000 stab wounds in him or something like that. Or the naked imagery you will find within modern Rome. We are not here to defend that. We are here to defend the traditions and styles and usage within the historical Orthodox Church. And first, if John has any other comments, or no.
No, I would say go on ahead. I have nothing.
All right. So the first where we have to start is obviously the earliest part of the church, which is the Old Testament, and how the statuary was not just a allowed thing in the Old Testament. It was not just a suggested thing. It was not just a weird thing you kept outside of the temple. It wasn't any of that. But it was a necessary component to worshiping God in the Old Testament. And first, we're going to go to Exodus when we have the Ark of the Covenant. And on the left, we actually have a Orthodox basilica from a church in France from the 8th century, which depicts the two cherubim at the side of the tabernacle, which is very interesting because many of our arguments for iconography come from the Old Testament, where God commands that there be carved, hammered cherubim made of gold on the ark. And many Orthodox people will cite this when arguing against iconoclastic Protestants, which I find very humorous because many people will at the same time not support statuary. But as you can see all throughout Exodus, it speaks of exactly how to make the statues, with every detail, what to make them out of. And this is a commandment. This is not a suggestion. This is a commandment for how the Ark of the Covenant and how God shall be worshipped. And here's a close-up. I think it's quite a beautiful basilica dome, in all honesty. It's a mosaic. And I have the Wikipedia, and we will make this presentation available to everyone publicly. And I would especially like this to be a reference. I have everything cited, and if I don't, just message me or comment, and I will find you. But I've tried my best to give all the resources I could possible. And here are some more modern Orthodox icons on how the Ark of the Covenant was pictured. And as we can see, we have the actual cherubim represented, but same concept. Here we have the procession on the right, and the same another representation of the procession on the left. And some more artistic representations of the Old Testament high priest, the burning of the incense, which again is used to defend the Orthodox Church today for our liturgy. Which it's all based in the Old Testament. And I think this is ultimately the largest argument, as it's purely scriptural and biblical. And now we're going to go to Solomon's temple, and even more cherubim were made within Solomon's temple. And again, they were overlaid with gold, which I personally believe symbols the divine light radiating off of the cherubim as they descend to do the work of God. It's described how long they must be. They were very, very, very large, very labor intensive. The amount of detail and the amount of work that the Israelites had to spend to worship God and to make these statues, which were pleasing, which he commanded to be made, I think, also attests to how much God does not despise these, obviously, and how appropriate they were. And again, same thing. They must be made in X, Y, and Z way. They must be made this many cubits wide. They must be chiseled, and they must be there to glorify God. Here we have another artistic representation with more instructions as to how to make them. They were so large and so extravagant that the wings reached to the side of the of the altar room, and even described how their wings were supposed to interlock and how they were supposed to touch, reflecting many of the visions of the prophets we would see later, as we would see, the cherubim within the thrones and how they would circle around each other within the visions of, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and so on and so forth. All purely biblical imagery. Again, instructions on how to make the statues. And again, it's a commandment. It's not a suggestion. God doesn't make these suggestions. They are commands as to how he wishes to be worshipped. And again, we see the Old Testament priest incensing the altar, which again has statues upon it. And I wanted to next get to how the symbolism is used today, which everyone within the Byzantine Rite approves. No one questions this. And today we use two cherubim or seraphim fans next to the altar, which are used in processions of the gospel, when the gifts are brought out, when the cross is brought out, when they bring out the gospel into the narthex to be venerated. They always bring two of the seraphim or cherubic fans on the left or the right. And this is a very important part. You'll see this in the earliest Byzantine altar rubrics where they have the two fans. It's very important, as it comes from the Bible. It's purely biblical. And some more images, because a lot of the time the altar fans are actually three-dimensional, carved, very three-dimensional. Some are completely three-dimensional, like these, beside the face. And here's another one, which again is a three-dimensional representation in a basic description. They're carried, usually gilded, or they're painted, or they're made of silver, or so on and so forth. And they're carried by altar servers at every procession. And here is in one way within one of our Orthodox Western Rite churches that uses this biblical idea, this biblical concept, this biblical instruction as to how to make the altar and how to worship God, where they have two statues on either the left or the right side of the altar, which is purely biblical, holding candles just like an altar server would. And here's another view, and this is St. Augustine's Church in Denver, if anyone is wondering. Next, I would like to get to usage of statuary in the early church if John doesn't have any more comments.
Yeah, I did actually have a comment. Did you want to talk about the use of Sarum and the angels on the docile poles?
If you could, yes, if you could bring, the illuminated manuscripts I've sent in the chat, if you could bring one of them up.
I will have to take a look at that, but you might have to carry on while I do that.
All right. So, and by the way, if anyone's wondering, we are talking about within Sarum, particularly pre-Tridentine Sarum, and this is very difficult to figure out. But they use a pillars which hold up the curtains, again based off the Old Testament, where they have curtains and pillars which have statues of angels on top, just like the Ark of the Covenant, where they hang up the curtain when they veil the altar, whether it be for Lent or when the Mass has stopped. Same in the Byzantine Rite. Sometimes they have curtains in the Byzantine Rite. In the Alexandrian Rite, it's always curtains, or they will have doors sometimes in the modern Byzantine Rite. But even this comes from an old Roman and Byzantine practice with the ciboriums. And if you don't know, the ciboriums are altar roofs. They would have 4 pillars that would hold up the roof on the altar. And they would hang curtains on this. Again, you see this all in ancient Christianity. And they would hang the curtains up to close the altar to cover and to protect the sanctuary for when the Mass is not being done. Or even within the Byzantine Rite, the Divine Liturgy would have even had ciboriums and templons. And we it's again very difficult to find many references before the schism to this practice, but from pre-Tridentine manuscripts, which there are many altar rubrics and missals which tell the priest how to serve the Mass, which are before the Tridentine reforms, which actually picture these statues with angels on top of the pillars, which again is very similar to the altar fans, again, if you can see. And he may be going to find those. I do not know. Because I've posted them before in our groups. But I think we found that. So now I'm going to... I don't know if I should wait, but...
Yeah, I'm going to actually... If you just want to give me a few more minutes, maybe one more minute, I'm going to have that pulled up on my side.
All right. Maybe I should look at the comments. So if anyone has any comments about the presentation so far, it would be now would be the time while he is finding those manuscripts.
All right, I have posted one of the manuscript illustrations in the Google presentation I have on my side that I had just presented. So if you want to stop sharing your screen and I can share mine and I can show that in action.
All right, let's see.
Okay. And I will share my screen and we can just do that real quick, a real quick swap. All right. It should take just a second to pull up. Can everybody see it okay? It's kind of a blurry photo, but it should be sufficient.
Yeah. Yep, it's visible.
Awesome. So this is a little bit about what we're talking about. Someone asks if we can zoom in. Yes. Oh, no. It appears we cannot. At least
If
not
you
in
press Control, you might be able to. And then use your scroll wheel.
perhaps. I think I have another example of a picture. I do. And I will share that one actually as well. Just give me a few seconds to load it in. And this is actually a far better example than that previous one. I'm just going to enlarge it so people can see it better. Because these are illuminated manuscripts, so they are, by nature of the medium, they're going to be smaller pictures because these were meant to be stylistic illustrations on texts in a book. So,
And if you can't, I just pasted some into my presentation if you can.
yeah, I just got one. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up.
All right.
And here we go.
Yep, there we go.
So you can see on the four corners of the altar there are the four angels located there.
And I have another example up for whenever you want to move on.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody can see that okay.
Yeah.
There are those golden brass poles located on the corners of the altar. Okay, I will go ahead and stop sharing that, and you can continue on with your presentation.
Are we visible? Are we visible? All right. I should be good now. John, you still there? You're muted.
I am here.
All right. Is this visible?
Once you present it, yes.
All right. Here we go. So this is another example. And sorry for the low resolution. There may be more than a few photos that are low resolution, but here's another closer up example. And again, these are all pre-Tridentine, before the Tridentine reforms. So we don't know if this is a pre-schism practice, but I still think it would be a good practice for us to use within the Western Rite today, a biblical, permissible practice. But now we're going to move on to the early patristic period and the usage and references to statuary within the patristic period. So anywhere from the first, second century to the 4th or 5th century. And one of the actually earliest examples we have of statuary is the catacombs. There are quite a few catacomb churches that actually have examples of statuary and relief images and things that blur the line between statues and relief images. And the first one is actually St. Agatha's catacombs. So St. Agatha's catacombs was established by St. Agatha, who had fled to the catacombs because of the persecution under pagan Rome. And this catacomb had been kept up till the 14th century and had been continuously restored until the 14th century, until it was dug up again around the 1960s, from what I recall. And as you can see, there is a statuette as the altarpiece. And this catacomb, the altar and much of the iconography has remained intact or has been restored. And here are some more examples. The middle example is a icon or a design that has remained within the church and was not restored and has remained the same, as where much of the iconography has been done over again because of wear and tear over the years. Here's another closer up photo. And again, this is, if you ever look in any ancient Jewish synagogues, they have a lot of imagery just like this, with plants and birds and designs within the temple. You'll see leaves and flowers, different animals, and also iconography of people and of angels and things when you look into the synagogue worship. And here we have more examples of restorations that were done prior to the 14th century. Much of it was not done in the 4th century. But as you can see, it retains much of its very old roots and styles as they were just repainted over. And here is one of the examples of one of the areas that has been restored, because the part of the catacomb was destroyed as it had been buried for 600, 700 years. And again, that is the statue above, or it's more of a relief image above, was restored, but originally was there, as it has a small tabernacle or diptych, as you could say, I guess. And again, very much Jewish symbology, certain plants and vases and designs. Again, with complete continuity with the temple and synagogue worship. Here's a close-up of the statue, which I believe is St. Paul, but nowhere in the church is it labeled. And nor do I think there isn't any information, as long as at least that I can see. And these are in Malta, by the way. And from what there is online in English, it doesn't state very much about where, about who a lot of the icons are of, because a lot of it, again, has fallen into disrepair.
I have a quick question about this image in Ossifrage. So I often hear some of those critical of statuary typically will say they're okay with statuary within alcoves, like is shown on the screen, but not freeform statuary. So what would you have to say to that objection?
I sort of think it's pretty arbitrary. I think to some degree they're applying the theology of two-dimensional iconography and relief images upon statuary, as where I think statuary has different can have different theological meanings and understandings and interpretations, as opposed to not as opposed to, but differing from other types of iconography. So I agree that things that are put within a sort of space that is deep or carved out is proper, and I think freestanding statues are also okay, as we can see within the Old Testament. Ultimately, and I will get to that more, because I have sort of a apologetic for the proper theological interpretations that I believe is used within the Bible and should be applied within the Western Rite in its application. But I think ultimately I'm going to refer to the Old Testament as a sort of argument for that. Um, and the fact that I don't know that we can apply every uh, theological interpretation of iconography onto statues. I do think that they are distinct, but not two separate things, as we can see with relief images, and that would be sort of the beginning of my response. And any more comments?
Yes, actually, Father Deacon Joseph Swaden says, arbitrary, you say? Father Deacon, if you want to join us tonight, just shoot me a message and we'll go ahead and add you in. But if not, feel free to stick around and comment. But I think he's just poking the bear a little bit.
No, I love Father Deacon Joseph Swaden. I love his videos. So don't worry. But anything else from you, John?
No, I think that was a well put together answer.
All right. And we're going to go on to some more examples. This is one of the more common ones that people show. And this isn't a strong proof of anything because it was used in more of a home setting rather than a liturgical setting, but it still gives credence to the idea that statues in general are not foreign to Christian tradition, are not foreign to the early church. And again, I don't think that statues were common in a lot of areas. I don't think that statues were really common at all. I think it was a smaller thing in mostly Western Christendom. But that I don't think that in any way sort of degrades the usage of statuary, and really anyway. But here's one example from the 3rd century in Roman Asia Minor, which would be Turkey, modern day Turkey. And another statue of a sculpture of Jonah being spat out from the whale, 3rd century. Same context, use most likely in a wealthy household that had converted to Christianity and had this sculpted. And again, very high detail, very interesting to say the least. But I don't think it does not give us too many. It doesn't give us very many arguments. But again, and here's another one. Same context within a home context, not within a strict liturgical setting. Again, same story. Within a house setting, wealthy family had paid for it to be made from the 4th century. And here is a stronger argument where we actually have a liturgical sculpture that was preserved in the catacomb of Domitilla in Rome, which was used and put in a corner diptych type presentation, as we can see in the Roman Church of Domitilla, which is now kept within a Roman museum, but originally was used within a liturgical context. And the references to that you can find anywhere. This is one of the more common examples that you will find. This was probably one of the first slides that I made. And the next we have is the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus, placed in Old St. Peter's Basilica, but was originally within another catacomb church. And if anyone knows of early sort of Roman tradition, they would do liturgy or the mass upon the altars, upon the sarcophaguses, as they were used as altars. And we see this again today with putting relics within the altar to consecrate a church when a bishop consecrates a church, which I think is quite an interesting touch. But as we can see, it has multiple biblical, especially Old Testament scenes, which are statuesque. They're really only connected by their feet, but are housed within a sort of a dug out or carved out chamber But now, I believe on the left, it is St. Peter and Paul with Christ in the middle and Satan below his feet. And then we have the entry into Jerusalem on the right. And here is Adam and Eve in the garden with the serpent climbing up the tree of life. And then next we have a reference to Eusebius in the book of Church History. And he actually records and this, we're not going to go over this whole thing because it's quite a long entry and it would take up a lot of time, but we will refer to it in the end of the presentation as well. But a wealthy woman had a bronze brazen image of Christ outside of her house, and from which a herb sprouted from below Christ, and people would come on pilgrimages to venerate this image of Christ in the early church, and the herb below Christ's feet that grow would actually work miracles, which I found to be quite interesting as it is referred to. And if anyone wants to look this, you can look it up, Eusebius in Church History, and look up Orthodox Bridge, which is a dialogue between Calvinists and Orthodoxy. Again, this is anti-iconoclasm with the Calvinists for the most part, which I find hilarious, again, if you read the entire article. And then we get to the father of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, who, in his apologia against those who decry holy images, he actually records from the life of St. Basil, one of St. Basil's disciples, who had had a statue of one of the early martyr saints, Macarius. He was a renowned martyr, and it was a statue of him holding a spear, and he prayed before it for the removal of an apostate heretic within the church. And the statue had vanished as the statue had spoke to him about the apostate, and it reappeared holding a bloody spear, which I find miraculous and very interesting. And this is one of the early references. This would have been the 300s of the 4th century, but is documented by St. John of Damascus. And the next reference I could find, as these references are very difficult, but I was very surprised as the father of the Byzantine Rite and the Byzantine liturgy actually spoke of statuary in his homilies. And this is not to be confused with his homilies on the statues as the issue in Antioch. That is a different issue that is going to come up if you try and search for this. But if you go on to New Advent, the Catholic Encyclopedia, you can find his homilies. And it's the statues issue within Antioch was a political issue, which had not really to do with the use of statuaries within a religious context. It had to do with monuments. And so on and so forth. Most of his homilies to the statues have nothing to do with statues, which is interesting. But if you read this, St. John is actually using the imagery of the church burning down to symbolize and to make similes with people disobeying the commandments of God and being wrathful and spiteful to other people within the church. He's comparing the temple sort of to the body of Christ in a very in imagery, and he's using this poetic language and showing how much the sort of internal conflicts in the church really affect its structure, and how integral it is that we follow the commandments and are merciful towards each other, and that we do not pick enemies within a church. And he speaks of statues as being within the liturgical context, and he uses simile to compare statues with people. And if we go to the next slide, if you're reading, he goes to compare statues to people and says, which of these statues that stand in this church, where the church is nothing but a house built for the souls of this men. Now, this house is not of equal honor throughout, but of the stones which contributes to it, which I find, again, extremely poetic languages. Some bright and shining, while others are smaller and more dull than they, yet superior again to others. We may see many as who are in the place of gold, the gold which adorns the ceiling. Others we may see who give the beauty and the gracefulness produced by statues. So he's referring to statuary as an object which brings much grace, and he's using objects within the church, especially statues, as similes with humans and cross-referencing certain things. And he says, some objects are in the church are made of stone, some are made of gold, but the ones that are made of stone sometimes add much more grace than the ones that are statues. And he says, who give the beauty and the gracefulness produced by statues, many we see standing like pillars. For as he is also accustomed to call men also pillars. And then he refers to Galatians, not only account of their strength, but also on account of their beauty, adding as they do much grace, having their heads overlaid with gold, which I find interesting because this is the same thing we see in the Old Testament, where they overlay gold on the heads of the statues, which is I find so very interesting that we see this. And
Ossifrage, if I may interject, Saint Justin Martyr refers to the crowning of statues as well.
I would like. I think I saw Allheart or post that. If he could post a link, because it's very difficult to find these references. If he could post that in there, I would love to bring it up during the stream, because I've never read that. Any more comments, John?
If we just want to take a quick pause and kind of run through some of the questions so they don't back up.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, Father Deacon says, I would ask this: doesn't the current canonical tradition of the Orthodox Church as a whole play a role in the development of the Western Rite? I hear a variant of this argument from married bishops.
Yes. I would say yes, and we could get to further references, but I don't actually think that statues, even within Orthodoxy today in the Byzantine Rite, were ever abolished. And there's more examples within the future, but I don't see statues as ultimately, say, how do I put it, as a separate thing from iconography. I think they're a type of iconography, and I think from relief images we can explicate the same sort of thing, the same meaning, the same concept. But again, even within the Byzantine Rite, I can give examples of statues, and that's what we will actually get to within the presentation we have later on of even modern examples of statues, which within the Byzantine Rite, which affirm what I believe and I'm saying.
Okay, so our next question or statement from Kevin: I find it interesting how they depict Christ similarly to other men in Roman statues. Yes, I think that might be an artistic focus, because statuary is definitely a developed art form. So what do you think about that, Ossifrage?
There's a place in Isaiah where it says the Messiah will not look extravagant, or he won't look any different than any other man. And he looks within the Roman depictions. We see this within iconography that he's depicted beardlessly because he was depicted as the emperor, and the emperor is traditionally shaved. So that would be one of the reasons why I think he's depicted in these certain Roman ways. We see this within the catacomb churches of, if you look up the catacomb icon of Christ the Good Shepherd, he's shaven because he is pictured in place of the emperor and even of pagan gods. He would like overthrowing the pagan gods within in they would replace the pagan god with Christ putting in himself in the rightful throne, because there's actually pagan myths and legends before Christianity, and even statues of pagan gods being pictured as the good shepherd. And this is also another defense of the Western Rite, because we see even in the early catacomb churches the reuse of certain pagan traditions, again, because all things are one in Christ. And my sort of understanding would be that, the fallen angels were very familiar with the liturgical worship in heaven. They saw the patterns of worship in heaven, and they wanted to exalt themselves above God. So they want to be worshipped like God. So they come down, influence men to be deluded, and ask men to essentially worship them as God was worshipped. Because who else is worshipped? What other worship is greater than the worship given to God? And that would be sort of why my defense and why he would be pictured that way.
Awesome. And Father Deacon also says, please note my user pick, and it looks like it is a relief crucifix with Our Lady and I assume St. John the Apostle. So very nice.
We love you, Father Deacon Joseph Swainen.
All right. So I think we can go ahead and pick up and keep running on the presentation.
All right. So, and I encourage everyone, again, we can't go through every quote, because this will give you a lot more context, and it really does help when reading his homily 10 on Ephesians to understand the context, because it's very, very poetic and very hard to understand because of the very beautiful imagery that he uses. So again, I encourage everyone to look this up, homily 10 on Ephesians, St. John Chrysostom. All right. So now we have another example of a statue from the 8th to 7th century. And it was an antique made of limestone that was within the ancient island monastery of Sulcis. Today, it's in Sardinia, Italy. And this was actually auctioned off, which I hate, because we see so many of these statues being put in auctions or within museums when they should be in churches. And I hate it so much. But this was an example of a statue used within a monastery. In the context, I don't know. I couldn't find any other references. And it doesn't look like it stayed within that monastery for very long after people found out about it. But was auctioned off. But here's another example of a small, I guess you could call it effigy or statuette within the liturgical or devotional practice in a monastery. And the same thing with another statue, same context, same monastery. But now we have a statue of the Theotokos and Christ. And you can see the crown on her head, same as the iconography we have today. Which I like a lot, and I think this is one of the examples of what proper statuary within an Orthodox context could definitely look like. And next we have the letters of St. Pope Gregory II, which was the Roman bishop during the time of iconoclasm within the Byzantine Empire. When it was really, really taken hold within the Byzantine Empire. And with, if we go, St. Pope Gregory II, before St. Germanus, the first of Constantinople, who was Patriarch of Constantinople at the time, who was still Orthodox at the time, had and eventually Saint Germanus of Constantinople would be deposed by the iconoclast Emperor Leo III. But a letter came from the emperor commanding him to accept the iconoclast edict and to destroy his images in Rome and to call a council to prevent their usage. And he answered in 727 a long defense of images. He explains the difference between them and idols. And he almost, if you read the whole thing, he almost mocks him because he refers to the Old Testament, the same verses that we actually referred to early in this presentation within it, and explains their use by Christians. And he goes on to do treatises against them. The emperor for interfering on this level with ecclesiastical matters and his persecution of image worshippers, quote unquote. And he refuses to call a council. And Emperor Leo III threatens to break one of the statues within St. Peter's Basilica, obviously threatening to destroy the Saint of Peter, the seat of Peter. And it was a statue within old St. Peter's Basilica. And he threatened to take St. Pope Gregory II prisoner. And he essentially just says he'll run away and that he's not going to get him. It's quite a interesting letter because he does almost mock the iconoclast emperor. And here we have a scholarly illustration of what old St. Peter's Basilica looked like. I think this particular image was based off what it would have looked like within the 12th or 13th century. But as we look on the right, we can actually see a statue that I believe is the one that's being referenced. I don't know that we have the original one that was being referenced at the time, but that is one of the statues that I believe may be a replica. But I've looked into it. I don't think they have the original one. But I thought this was a nice illustration. And if people didn't know what old St. Peter's Basilica looked like, this is a very good example. We see the Templon, which is actually Greek, and the Ciborium, which covers the altar, which you can see in the back, sort of with the curtains hanging over it. And this doesn't actually look that different from many Russian churches today, which I find very interesting. And if John doesn't have any other comments, or if anyone has any questions in the chat, I will move on.
I would just say check the private chat and StreamYard before you move on. But other than that, no, everything looks great. I think we could do an entire show soon about Templons versus iconostases versus rood screens as well. So I think that we definitely could take a look at that.
We are about halfway through the presentation.
Okay. Well, we are getting a little late for our folks on the East Coast, so I didn't know if we could pick it up a little bit in terms of pacing, but
I could try.
Okay.
If anyone asked or stressed that it would be late.
We're just losing a little bit of viewers here, so I just want to make sure that we're pressing on. But other than that, we can keep going.
All right. So, and next we will go on to St. John of Damascus against those who decry holy images, which he is, if you read it, again, everyone please read these references. He is speaking to a iconoclast who had a very strange position that you don't hear about. But there were people at the time who did not wish to make images of saints besides the Theotokos, and they would make images of Christ. And that was it. And the heretic that he was speaking with at the time and making an apologetic against only made statues of Christ and the Theotokos. And throughout this section of the Apologia, he's writing about, against the usage of, or against the heretic who does not wish to picture the saints. And he goes on to to make biblical arguments, again, refers to the Bible all the time, over and over and over again to defend the use. And then he goes on to refer to the cherubim, which are, again, statues, and he even says that they were carved. And he goes to defend then iconography with the holy forms and imageries, and rather than just making beasts and plants, because God commanded that there be cherubim. Cherubim are persons. They are not just animals or plants. They speak. They have minds. They're thinking beings. We don't just make images of inanimate or inanimate objects or non-rational beings. And he goes to point out a contradiction with many iconoclasts, because they would call us, they would point out, thou shalt not make graven images before me, yet God commands making graven images, because they don't understand the scriptures. And he goes on to state, now, if we make a statue of Christ and the likeness of the saints, does not their being filled with the Holy Grace increase the piety of our homage? Again, just like St. John Chrysostom states, that they are filled the area with grace. They are filled with the Holy Spirit, and they increase the piety of our homage. Again, a very biblical, very beautiful presentation against iconoclasm and against iconoclasts. Again, this is the father of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. One of the most influential fathers of the Seventh Ecumenical Council that everyone loves and refers to. And now I'll move on, if we don't have any other comments and or questions.
It looks like everything is, we don't have any questions pertinent to so far.
All right. So now we're going to get some more examples, and these are going to be a little bit later within the Western Church, but I don't think it invalidates them as examples. But here is a statue of Saint Faith. Again, we see the statue is adorned in gold leaf, just like the Old Testament, just like other previous examples that we saw and read about. And I think this is a very interesting, and again, this was used in an abbey in a monastery, and was adorned in gold. Again, I think is biblical and correct. And here we get to a much more interesting example, which is the Volto Santo crucifix, or the Holy Face crucifix. And this has actually been carbon dated, so I'm not relying on just hearsay. This has been carbon dated back to within 100 years, from 770 to 880 AD. And the story goes that in 742, Gautier, bishop of Suppline, which I believe is in Germany, undertakes a pilgrimage to the Holy Land and learns and arrives in Jerusalem. And he receives in a dream the revelation of a place where a miraculous crucifix was hidden. And having found it, he decided to repatriate it to Italy by sea. The ship and its precious load therefore left the Holy See and headed unmanned to Luni, the port closest to Lucca. However, the inhabitants of Luni, known to be fierce wreckers, I'm guessing some type of, I'm guessing that means a pirate of type, want to take precious possession of the cargo, but they did not succeed because the vessel went back to sea each time they approached it. At the same time, in Lucca, Bishop John saw the arrival of the Volto Santo in a dream, and he rushed to Luni, and the famous crucifix was immediately offered to him, installed in the St. Martin Cathedral of Lucca. The Volto Santo began to work miracles within that church from then on. Here's a better picture of it. And again, well, one of the things I want to note is he's pictured as a king. He has a beard, and he even has almost liturgical vestments. and his arms are not sagging, as we see in a lot of later Renaissance art, but in most Orthodox iconography and imagery, we actually see Christ upon the cross with his arms straightened. And a lot of the times it's called Christ reigning. And this is a very good example of how Orthodox iconography and Orthodox statuary should be used within the Western Rite. And I thought this was very interesting when I found it, and I thought this would be a beautiful
I just
thing.
wanted to point out, I find that the fact that the corpus is vested liturgically, I find that very interesting because it really accentuates the theology of the sacrifice of the liturgy, the Mass, that Christ is offering. He's both, the victim and the priest, as it's often said. So I find that very fascinating.
It's just
We have a question from Father Deacon pertinent to this. Were the gold items added later?
It doesn't state. Most of the references are German, but I do not know. But the wood in and of itself is he's vested liturgically under the wood, but I don't know what was added.
Let's keep rolling.
All right. And here, in the old Orthodox Basilica of St. Apollinaris in Classe Ravenna, Italy, this is a side altar, which has an ancient ciborium next to it, which has, if we go to the next slide, has a statuette of the Theotokos. And you see this, this is very similar to the St. Seraphim of Seraph icon, which is not coming to me what it's called. Sometimes it's called the Theotokos of Mercy. I don't know if you know what it's called, John.
I do not.
Well, everyone's seen it, where she's holding, and I've heard it called the Theotokos of Great Mercy. But if people don't know, it was a form of iconography, and there is an icon that Saint Seraphim of Seraph used quite a lot. And if you've seen Orthodox iconography, he's even pictured bowing before the icon. And this is the same position, which I find just really fascinating and interesting, as this is, from the 9th century, early 9th century. And here is the front basilica dome of St. Apollinaris Cathedral in Ravenna, which I like a lot. A good example of pre-schism iconography, which is Roman and very similar to the Byzantine Constantinopolitan tradition. And here is a illustration. You can actually see in the left, you can actually see the side altar on this illustration. And this is the illustration of the altar before they had removed the ciborium, because modern day, they use the Novus Ordo Mass in this basilica, which it tears me to shreds. But they had removed the ciborium, but it originally had them, as essentially all, if not most, Roman churches had some type of ciborium or columns or anything of that sort. And I like this a lot. Again, if anyone's still watching. All right. And the next, we have these are less strong cases, as they're sort of very convoluted, and the history is very difficult to find. But there are 3 Black Madonna statues, and the origin of why they have the black faces is sort of different depending on each statue, and there are other even iconography that have the same face, which are different. But the explanation for why they are black usually has to do with the material they're made of. As we saw with the Volto Santo crucifix, it was not painted. It was just wood that had been carved and left as its natural tone. And some we also see or hear that it's because of incense, or that the paint itself had actually aged and become black. It's not I don't think it's because you hear a lot of people, modern criticists, higher critics, stating that, oh, it's just a pagan goddess worship, and you even see Protestants making this argument, which I find very funny. But essentially, all of these statues are recreations of the original ones, which were destroyed in some period. So on the right is the Virgin of Regla, or the Virgin of the Rule, which is a term that St. Augustine used for the Theotokos, and was originally hidden, I think, in some place in Spain, because the Muslims tried to destroy it. And I believe at some point it was destroyed, but then they made recreations of it later on. And the same with the Our Lady of Esselstein, I don't know how to say it, which is in the middle, but was originally used in a monastery but then had gotten destroyed at some point. And then on the left is the Virgin of Montserrat, which is Romanesque almost, actually, Constantinopolitan type style of the Virgin enthroned with Christ, which is another reconstruction, but that had taken place, I think, in the 12th century. And all of the links to read about these and their various nooks and crannies are there. And on the right, the Virgin of the Rule, there's a Antiochian church in Florida that is a shrine to the Virgin of the Rule in Miami. And the middle, Our Lady of Esselstyn, I don't know how to say it properly, Einsiedeln, actually is on the calendar of the Antiochian Western Rite. We celebrate a feast for it.
I'm pretty sure she's also on the Rocor calendar.
Yeah. So these are some of the examples. And apparently the Virgin of Montserrat statue has worked miracles. I think all of them have worked miracles at some point. But we're going to get to another example of a statue in the Ottonian, Carolinian sort of era of iconography and art, is the Madonna of Essen, which is a statue dating to the late 10th century and was created by the granddaughter, who is an abbess. And she was granddaughter of the Emperor Otto I, who, and I'm actually quite fond of Emperor Otto I and the Second. If you ever look into them, they have personal prayer books and plenty of illuminated manuscripts, which they had commissioned to be made, which are very beautiful and have their own sort of style. But here is another example of a gilded statue within a church that was used liturgically within a monastery, and is still there till today. And you can look it up. This is an easier one that I could find that there's articles on. And another example, this is again the Ottonian era, but this was another cross, which is statuesque in nature, which is small, but is a gilded and silver crucifix, and is one of the surviving relics from the Ottonian era. And again, it's sort of a pre-schism structure to the icon. We see his hand straightened out. We don't see a mortified body, but we do see a symbolism with his head hanging down, symbolizing the suffering in his human nature on the cross, which I think is very proper. It shows the proper theology, because he still reigns from the cross and he still ruled from the cross, even though he had suffered. And it was not an altar cross, but was made an altar cross later within the 14th century. And now we get to John's section. I don't know if he prepared a section for Our Lady of Walsingham.
I actually did it before you arrived, so for our viewers, you can go back in time when the video is uploaded and check it out.
But this is the best statue, best one, period. All right. So next we have an ivory statue and carving from Constantinople, which was placed in a small tabernacle, which is one of the few surviving examples of statuary within the Constantinopolitan Rite, but it did exist. And this is what you see a lot of the times. I think this is in the Orthodox Arts Journal presentation as well. It's in a lot of presentations. And we have those, some of the presentations on statuary from an Orthodox perspective in the back of the presentation. In another one from Cologne Cathedral, the Guerrero Crucifix.
Ossifrage, I don't mean to interrupt, but that last slide, I've actually seen it around as listed as an actual statue from Hagia Sophia. I'm not sure how true that is, but I've heard that.
I've heard it associated with the word Hagardia, but I don't know if it's from the Hagia Sophia. I've all the scholarly references I have are like from certain libraries. I don't remember seeing it specifically in any scholarly source being referenced to being in the Hagia Sophia, but I wouldn't be surprised personally. Next, we get to the Guerrero crucifix, which was used sort of like an altar crucifix hung above the altar, and is still there in the Cologne Cathedral, and is another example of Ottonian sculptures within Germany, which I like a lot. Again, we see relative pre-schism representation, INRI on the top of the cross. We have the back plate, which has a cruciform halo. And the arms are not overly sagging like the modern day abomination papal crucifix. But we see him gilded upon a plate, which is obviously showing the divine radiance and divine light radiating from Christ, which I find very nice, very beautiful, and another very good example of some of the usages that I believe would be proper within the Western Rite today. And now we jump to a Byzantine statue within Castoria, Greece, which is actually miracle working. And originally, the statue was built in the 13th late 13th century, either to 1296 or 1297, and the church building itself was earlier than that. But the statue is found on the right, where usually in a cathedral, if you go, there would be the bishop's throne. It's the same area. And they do not know where it came from as of today. But people do say that it might have been a gift from the emperor from Constantinople, either brought there or it was carved in a different village surrounding. The most popular tradition says that two nuns brought the statue there from Ionia in the 13th century in a carriage. During the Turkish occupation, the church was heavily damaged, and yet it was said that when the Ottomans went to burn down the church, they allowed the locals to remove the statue, ensuring its preservation. And today, the statue is considered to be miraculous, and these miracles are especially reported on the feast of the church, which is April 23rd, along with the miracles. St. George is said to have occurred. Miracles of St. George and visions have said to have occurred in the church, and at one point, the faithful covered the statue with a glass casing to protect it from humidity and dust. But this St. George appeared in the dreams of the faithful and told the village to remove it. An interesting folk belief, not necessarily associated with Orthodox belief, has arisen associated with the statue upon observation. One will see the statue actually covered with coins if we go to the last slide. and they do not know why the coins stick. But the tradition is that one of the laymen of the church had a dream, and St. George appeared and stated that if you have weak faith, your coin will not stick to me, but if you have a strong faith, the coin will stick to me. And they don't know why it sticks because the statue is completely made of wood, and it's very interesting. But here's the church, again on the right, usually where the bishop's throne would be. And we can even see iconography to the left of him that's very, very old. We can see. Here's a close-up, and those are the references on the left and right, if anyone's wondering. And next is a very common one you'll see a lot defending use of statuary. And it is a miracle-working statue from a monastery in Kosovo. And the statue is really well known to help women who have barren wombs to conceive. This is, very biblical with Samson's mother, or Hannah, or even, the Theotokos miraculously giving birth to Christ. Same type of miracle, which I find very, very interesting, very beautiful, and a very good parallel to even Scripture. I think this really attests to the church the fact that we have miracles which are, in continuity with the Old Testament, which I love. And I think this is another example of statues within a liturgical context, which people make pilgrimage to, works miracles. And I think if this doesn't convince you, I don't know what will, personally. Here's another image of it within the church, which is having iconography put up. This is within the redoing of iconography around it, and you can see it's placed within a area which is hollowed out and has gold leaf surrounding it, again representing the divine light radiating off of the Theotokos in Christ. Here we're going to get to some examples of what, and when Father G. and Joseph Sweden asked whether or not, the resurrection of the Western Rite should, and whether the trajectory of the church should influence the modern Western Rite. Here's an example of sort of the tradition of statuary not actually ever dying out within the church. And here we have some examples, especially in Russian churches, of having statuary. And here's one example. And yes, some are Renaissance influenced, but I still think it goes to show the usage of statuary and the view of the church of statuary. Here we can see a very Baroque Orthodox cathedral within Lithuania, which has statues on top of the very high iconostasis with Christ above it, which is actually, I personally believe it's based off the Guerrero crucifix at the top. Same structure, same iconographic tradition. And then we have a church in Helsinki, Finland, which again, I believe is a Russian church. And we can see at the top, we have two angels at the top of the iconostasis. Again, symbolizing the angels protecting the gates of heaven, and again, being gilded. We see this so many times over and over where the statues are adorned with gold, representing obviously the divine light of Christ radiating off of them as they participate in the divine light of Christ. And the next, we have St. Isaac's Cathedral within Moscow. And here are some of the statues, which again are gilded, which adorn the dome, and even of parts. If you look at the top, there's some that are on top of the iconostasis, like the other church previously. Again, symbolizing the angels protecting, the gate to heaven, and so on. And then next, we actually have a video of a Orthodox priest in Russia who have a statue within their church.
So you said this church was in Russia?
Yep. It's all in Russian. I don't understand a word of it.
Is this the statue here in the middle?
Yeah, give it a second. Yeah. It's only 2 minutes long.
Радуйся с предвечным Богом младенцем в Назарет пришедшим, радуйся таинству спасения рода человеческого послужившим, радуйся лестнице Евы же восходим земли на небо, радуйся всему миру прийти покое, радуйся, яко с верою поклоняемся пречистому Господу изображению, радуйся, яко от Него приемлем благодатные дары о спасении душ наших.
I find it interesting that the statue has the garment around it,
Yeah.
much like how Western statues are girded with copes.
You see it everywhere. And this seems to be wooden again. And they even go up and venerate it.
This is fascinating. I often hear people speak about how do we venerate statues, and I find that very fascinating that they were demonstrating.
And this is just every day. This is like what they would do with a miracle working icon or something. Have a small service for it, venerate it, and treat it just like an icon, because that's what it is. This is not unusual. This is not, some niche weird thing. It's an icon of the Virgin Mary and Christ. There's nothing pagan about it. They're both crowned. They put a garb over it. It's a beautiful thing. And, I don't, especially in Russia, in a lot of areas of Russia, this is not uncommon. And there's not this attitude of, oh, that's just some weird Roman Catholic thing. That's some pagan thing that they adopted because of their pagan ADS and X, Y, and Z. It's not what it is. And I thought this would be a great video to end, how some examples, and there are others, of statues being used. And if John, while I'm going on, could you, there's a picture that I posted in the Slaves of the Immaculate Theotokos, a Romanian church that had a statue that I would like to put up, but I didn't have the time as I just got home from work.
Did you just send it?
No, it's up there a little bit. I posted it yesterday. It's in general chat.
It might take me a second to find out what you're talking about.
I could send it to you personally.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it, so you might have to send it to me. But yeah, that was while you do that, that was a really fascinating explanation of how to venerate statues. And as a sidebar, so to speak, one objection I often hear is that you can't venerate statues in the same way that you can an icon. Therefore, they shouldn't be in the church. My response to that is you can't venerate icons up in high places, but however, they're still sensed and you still invoke those saints. Therefore, they're still venerated. Kissing is not the exclusive act of veneration.
Yeah, there's it's sort of, yeah, like there's icons that we can't even touch because they're so high up. But some are. I don't think it's different. I think that the theological interpretation of icons could be different, and it could be the same in a lot of ways to a standard two-dimensional iconography. But I think what it actually entails in and what we actually do as a result of the theological implications is ultimately the same. I think they exemplify different things in different ways. And that's the same. That's why we have different types of icons. That's why we have, different positions that the Theotokos holds Christ in. That's why they have different hand positions on Christ that symbolize two natures, or X, Y, and Z thing. They're different ways of teaching, different ways of symbolizing, different ways of getting to the archetype in a certain mode. And there's nothing wrong with it, ultimately. And I sent you the photos personally.
Yeah, I'm putting them up if you just want to give me just a second.
All right, no problem. My voice is getting raspy because I've been talking too. So
Oh, please mute yourself while you eat. And I am putting those pictures up, and I will present those momentarily as soon as I can get them up.
all right,
And here we go.
let me exit out. It's loading. Am I still audible? All right. Yep.
So here are the Romanian pictures that you were wanting to talk about.
Yeah. This is a Romanian church, and I actually had this this priest was recommended to be my friend on Facebook, and he just had these up, and it's they had taken a church or used a church in France, and I believe, I don't know, but I believe this was there, and they obtained it somehow, and it's an altar piece now. It's just like we see it used in so many Western contexts. And in the procession of the statue in the Russian church, they even put it on an altar, just like we do icons, and did a whole service for it to be venerated.
And I'll also say it's not just a Marian statue. Next to it is a statue of Saint Joseph. I zoomed in. It's a small white statue.
Yeah. Again, we see the same things. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with Saint Joseph holding Christ. There's nothing wrong with having a statue of it. There's nothing wrong with having a statue of Theotokos and Christ. Because these
Okay, and we have a quick question. Scottish Slav asks, "What's the name of the parish?"
I can find it later.
All righty, let's keep moving. I will go ahead and kill my stream there. All right, and you're free to share your screen.
All right. All right, we there?
Yep, we are there.
All right. And here's going to be just broad examples of how we use statues in the Western Rite, and what I believe and what I have found based on my research, what I believe is proper. And I don't actually think there are any improper usages of statues within Orthodoxy. Here's an example of St. Patrick's. Obviously, this is probably the most famous Western Rite church. If you ever watch any of the documentaries, Father Patrick is great. I've had phone calls with him. But on the left, we see a Marian statue, again on an altar. And this is the same thing we see at the Catacomb Church of St. Agatha, where there is a statue on the altar. And they have a cruciform statue on the altar as well. Same thing, very beautiful, and this is proper usage. And here we have St. Augustine's in Denver. I think this was shown before on the previous presentation that John did. Here it is again, altar statue, because Christ and the Theotokos are sort of the centers of the worship. If you've ever been to the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, Theotokos and Christ are sort of the center of worship. Here is the Virgin of the Rule Church in Miami. You have to search it in Spanish, Virgina de Regla in Spanish, if you want to find it. But this is the church in Miami, Florida, which is the national shrine, with a very beautiful small altar, as it is at a house church. here's another photo of St. Augustine's to give us reference. And the last one is my absolute favorite video that exists on YouTube. And this is Abbot Thomas, who is he is the abbot of a Benedictine Cistercian monastery in Germany, and he is under Rorate. And if John's okay, I kind of want to play this whole thing. But he sings Salve Regina to Theotokos, and they sing it in front of a wooden Marian statue.
Yes, it's fine with me. We just might have to talk over it a little bit to ensure it's fair use, but yeah.
Also notice they're completely pre-schism vestments.
Mute yourself, Ossifrage. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right.
Ossifrage, are you familiar if Dom Thomas speaks English?
Yeah, he speaks a little bit. I've spoke to him a little bit.
I would love to have him on the show.
I don't know if it's too. I think it's at a conversational level, as I've like he has videos on YouTube, and I comment about how great it is and how I wish them to continue, and it's in good English from his replies from what I've seen.
I might send him an invite. That would be a real treat.
Yeah, that would be very good. This monastery is very very beautiful, and I really wish that it stays open and does not get closed like the other Orthodox monastery, the other Rorate monastery, the shrine to Our Lady of Walsingham. I really hope this stays open. I thought this was probably the best example of the usage within the Western Rite. I think this is probably one of the most absolutely ideals, and I just I loved it so much because they're using a pre-Tridentine liturgical rite. They're using completely pre-schism vestments. It's the way it was, and I think if this does not touch your heart, and if it does not truly reach to you and talk to you about especially what St. John Maximovich did and what his goal was for in the West, then I don't know that I can give any other arguments to support the Western Rite and the usage of statuary within the Church.
Yeah, I would agree. UR asks if there's any more information on the monastery. They actually do have a website and subsequent YouTube videos. I will go ahead and try to put those in the video description after this video uploads. So you might want to check back tomorrow at some time and check the description, and I will go ahead and provide some links. They have a lot of YouTube videos on their mass and things to that nature. So check back tomorrow. All right,
Yeah, so-
Ossifrage, did you have any other slides that you'd like to go through?
Let's try. Yeah, we're gonna go over the rudder, and sort of.
Oh, perfect. We had All Souls asking about that before you got on here. So yeah, I'd love to see that.
All right. So, and I want you to keep in mind, the rudder was written by Saint Nicodemus the Hagarite. I am in no way saying that he's not a saint. I am in no way saying he doesn't have good input, and I am in no way doubting that he is a saint. This is not what we're here to do. I'm not claiming to be above him. I am here to give my a clear explication of the usage of the church, and I tried my best not to impart my or to taint any of the subjects or any of the materials. But this is in the rudder, which was 16th or 17th century, which is a commentary on how to interpret the the Seventh Ecumenical Council and the canons of Seventh Ecumenical Council. But one thing that I really want to stress is that not even the modern Byzantine Rite believes or uses his strict interpretation or his interpretation at all. Because as we see, he doesn't even believe that the church does not, it makes them, which we've pointed out that it's not true, and suggest that it should not be made at all. And we know if Russian churches, like this is like very, very, very common, have statues outside of the church. But he doesn't even believe within the rudder that statues should be used outside or inside the church, or should be manufactured at all, which is not done. And I've shown within my presentation that statues have been used inside the church, outside of the church, in liturgical contexts and non-liturgical contexts, as iconography and so on and so forth. Again, we have statuary, statuous relief images present in the catacomb churches. I believe that a lot of what was written in the rudder was written because of poor access to certain references. Saint Nicodemus the Hagarite could not go and look up on DuckDuckGo X, Y, and Z statue X, Y, and Z. You know, and if John has any comments as well.
None at the moment. I am just preparing a statue that you missed that was produced as early as last year in the mainstream Russian church. So go ahead and continue.
All right. And he goes on to explicate or to talk about what the council states as permissible with in iconography. And he goes on to state that that the council states that paints and mosaics and tessellated work and other suitable materials, and he goes on to state gold and silver and other and other metals are used, and that they are upon sacred utensils, robes, and sheets, just like we have iconography on the vestments of our priests. And this is the context. And he goes to mention that it does not state a word about statuary, and it seems to be antagonistic. And I don't believe that statuary is an extremely common practice. I do think it was a little more common within the Western Church than the Eastern Church, but I do think it was a tradition. I do think was more present than what I have today. I don't think the examples that I have are even close to how many statues that there actually were. But I believed it was a niche thing, and as we see within the Russian church where they venerate the statue, they treat it as if it's almost like it's miracle working. It's a great blessing from God because it's different, it's rare. And I think this was sort of a lot of the attitude in the way it was treated within the church as because statues that take so much work. You have to find suitable material. You have to carve it. You have to stain it. You have to preserve it, especially if it's wood. Wood rots in 10 years, let alone, the 1,300 years, like with the Holy Face crucifix, which I only think attests to its to it being miraculous because it has not decayed. And so I don't believe that the council personally is antagonistic to statues. I just don't think it mentions it because I don't think that it was a common practice, but I don't think that it says anything against it either, personally. If John has any comments, feel free to interject.
None on this. Once you're done talking about the canon, just let me know, and I will go ahead and show my next example.
And my response is, I don't claim that statues were prevalent, and I don't believe they're being antagonistic. All they really were doing was giving common examples, especially within a basilica type context, which many of the fathers were, bishops, in what they thought was appropriate. And next, he states that none of the letters of Pope Gregory or Germanus, Pope Gregory to Germanus or Pope Adrian were present, and statues were not present. But as we've shown, Emperor Leo III threatens to destroy the statue of St. Peter in St. Peter's Basilica. And beyond that, I haven't found very many other references. But again, we can go back to St. John Chrysostom or St. John of Damascus, where he references them. But again, I think it was just an example of the lack of them being within Russia at that certain period in time.
Yeah, I would also add from the quote on screen, it appears to be an argument from silence as opposed to an outright condemnation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and I think again with the examples that I can find, there are not that many churches left that are pre-schism to begin with, and then we take into account that statues and whether they're made out of stone or wood, they decay. I mean, I have furniture in front of me that's decaying and it's not even 10 years old, and so on and so forth. And it's it really is a blessing that some of them have actually survived. And that would be sort of my comment and my response. And I gave the slides numbers where they are within that they are referred within the church. And he actually goes on, and this is a reference to Eusebius because he actually goes on to talk about Eusebius and him documenting the miracle-working statue of Christ. And he goes on, and I encourage you to read the Rudder entry, as I encourage anyone watching this to read the entire Rudder entry about this. He goes on to essentially state that the statues were an exception. That specific statue was an exception because of the rarity of Christianity at the time, in that it really doesn't mean that it's necessarily affirming the specific veneration of statues, but just as a general, it was a very stressed situation, a very unideal situation. But I think with my quotes that in the other examples I've given today, I think I have shown that it's not as niche as we would think it to be. And I don't think he outright condemns it, but I do think he very much suggests that they should not even be produced when he refers, especially in the first part of the entry, which I don't think has ever been followed, especially within the Russian tradition. And then we are
speaking of the Russian tradition.
And last we have the last here are the articles that I read beforehand, easy list because some of them are difficult to find, that goes into statuary, and then I will hand it to John.
Alrighty, so I will now share one last time my presentation that has grown about by double since I began the show. which is pretty remarkable. But here we are. This is the statue at the Russian Military Cathedral that was just constructed in 2020 above the high altar. It is a glorious statue of Jesus Christ, and here he is arrayed in gold and majesty, surrounded by what appears to be blue mosaic tiles and light. So even the Russian patriarch himself seems to be fine celebrating under a 50 to 75 foot tall statue of Christ. So I would just put that out for people to think about.
And we see the same thing, gilded, and behind him he even has seraphim, which are gilded on the mosaic. Same concept of the seraphim being filled with his light. So,
alrighty, well, I just wanted to thank you very much, Ossifrage, for joining us, and thank you for your presentation that you have worked pretty hard on, and I'm also very grateful that you have links and the receipts to back everything up that you have presented. I will link your Discord server Hesperia in the description of this video. I will also go ahead and link up the monastery in Germany, as well as any other links that I can recall that I promised to put. Aside from that, it looks like our viewers are passed out sleeping. We did kind of a late show this evening, so I don't anticipate many questions coming in, but I just wanted to thank you, Ossifrage, for your hard work and diligence in preparing the presentation. And I hope to have you on as another guest for another topic sometime.
are we concluding it? It's gone for 2 hours now.
Yes, we are going to wrap it up.
Yeah. Any room for anything else?
No, I have to get to bed, but
All right.
all right. Well, thank you very much, and good night, and God bless everybody.
God bless.